All right. So we are continuing our study in the Hebrew poetry, and our focus right now is just uh, learning parallelism. Excuse me. And we've been talking about that the last couple of sessions. And if you'll remember, it's one of the structural features in Hebrew poetry. There are three primary structural features. One is the stanzas, which is just each unit of thought in the poem, like a paragraph in an epistle. And then parallelism is another structural feature that is in many of much Hebrew poetry. And then acrostics is another structural feature that hopefully we'll look at the end of this evening. It's kind of um, an interesting structural feature in some poems. So again, parallelism has been our focus. It's common Hebrew poetry. And again, this is where two lines are grouped together to express an idea. And there are three main types of parallelism in Hebrew poetry that we looked at: synonymous, contrastive, and developmental. And these are the three main categories. As I said before, I think scholars have identified other ones, but it gets pretty technical, and I don't think it's helpful. I really see these three as sort of the major ones. Of course, we have synonymous, which is the second line repeats the first line. Not exactly, it's not exact repetition, but it repeats the same idea, maybe uses synonyms or other words that have a similar meaning. So each line connects in that way, and they will be grammatically parallel as well. And then contrastive parallelism is similar to synonymous, except that the second line is a contrast to the first. So in synonymous, each of the lines go together. They say the same thing. In contrastive, they'll say the opposite. They'll contrast two things. And then finally, there's developmental, which is a little bit broader parallelism. In developmental, the second line develops, or one line develops the other. That is, either it adds to it, adds another thought, that would be an expansion or addition, or sometimes the other line gives explanation or illustration. Or at times, one line will give the reason or the result of the other line. So these are three kinds of developmental parallelism that we see. And then there's a special case of the chiasm, which is where the second line is reversed. It's a synonymous or contrastive parallelism in thought, and then the second line is in reverse order compared to the first. And we're going to see a few of these when we look at our exercise in Psalm 51. Hopefully you were able to see some of those. And that takes us to the last exercise I asked you to do, and I'm glad you guys were able to give it a try. I think we'll learn the most if you actually try to do it yourself. And so let me set this up for us here, and we'll give it a try. Let's do this. So what I'll do is I'll put the different kinds of parallelism over to the right there on your screen, so you can have that as a reminder. And then I've got Psalm 51 to the left. All right, so a well-known psalm. Of course, remember the circumstances of that psalm. Who can tell us what prompted this psalm? What was the background to this psalm? Anybody remember? I guess first, who wrote this psalm?
David.
Yes, it's a Psalm of David. That's what the title tells us. And the title also tells us what the circumstances were when David wrote this psalm. What had happened?
So when the prophet Nathan came to him after he had an affair with Bathsheba.
Yes, exactly. And Nathan confronted him, and This is all in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. And this psalm was his response, David's response to Nathan's rebuke. And so we see here how he responded. So he likely wrote it, while he was waiting in his up in his chambers, because he had been told his son would not live. The baby would not live or survive. So here we have really a prayer, David's prayer, as he was considering the conviction he felt from Nathan's rebuke. So with that as the background, let's take a look at each of the verses, because I think every verse here, except perhaps one, David employs parallelism. And he really focuses on one particular kind of parallelism. So we've looked at verse 1 before as an example. Let me see here. We had 2 lines. Now it looks like 4 on your screen, but that's just because I couldn't fit the whole line. If I had made the font small enough here, you could see it's 2 lines, but then we can't read it. So we have here 2 lines, and we noticed before how the lines connect. He says, "Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness." And then notice, "According to the greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions." So here we have, I think it's synonymous in that. Notice, "Be gracious to me." So that's a request that he makes. And then he says, "Blot out my transgressions." So it's both the request. So I would put those in parallel to one another. And then, "according to your loving kindness," is parallel to "according to the greatness of your compassion." So we see here a synonymous parallelism, but notice the second part of the verse is in reverse. The second line is in reverse compared to the first. And so that's a chiasm, where they're synonymous in the idea. They're repeating a similar idea, but the second line has been flipped grammatically. And so this "according to the greatness of your compassion" is what begins the second line, but that is what "according to" ended the first line. And so we would call this synonymous, but also it's a chiasm. All right, and that focuses, a chiasm focuses attention on the what was reversed. So in this case, God's loving kindness and his compassion. David is giving emphasis, is emphasizing God's loving kindness and compassion. That the parallelism is focusing our attention on that. The chiasm. Okay. All right. Let's go to the second line, and I'm gonna ask you guys, one of you guys, to read it, and then give what you think, what kind of parallelism it is. So we'll start. Dwayne was really excited about this assignment, so we're going to start with Brother Dwayne on verse 2.
I got the first one wrong. I didn't get it right, but
no problem. That's why we're doing this practice.
Yeah, well, I thought it developed a thought. I didn't. Well, anyway, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. Well, this is what I thought was synonymous, or what is it? Synonymous. Yeah. Synonymous.
Yeah. Notice what's connected here. He says, "Wash me thoroughly."
Cleanse me.
Cleanse me. Right? Those are similar idea. And then from, and then my iniquity, my sin. Again, same idea. This is definitely synonymous. Let me fix this here.
Just repeats the same thing.
Yeah, he's essentially repeating the same thing, but saying, using different words here to do that. Now, notice here, by the way, right, these are exactly parallel. What if the second line, what if he had said this? What if he had said, from my sin, cleanse me? What would that show us if he had put it this way? It's still synonymous, but notice in that case, if he had done this,
Is it
from my
chiasm?
sin, yeah, this would be a chiasm if he did it that way. And actually, guys, in the Hebrew text, it is a chiasm. For some reason, this translation did not identify it that way. Let me show you. Now, we wouldn't see this in the English text. Okay, here's the New American Standard Translation. That's just what Dwayne correctly identified, that synonymous parallelism there. Let me see. I think all the English translations just followed that. But let me show you in the I know we don't read Hebrew, but I'll just show you from it. So in this case, it's it's verse 3, but this word here is wash me. That's the term, wash me thoroughly. Oops. Do that all the time. I'm getting lost here. Okay. Make sure on the right. There it is. Okay. Yeah, I didn't recognize some of the terms here. All right. Sorry, it's line verse 4 in this. Because of the Hebrew verses are a little bit different, but yeah, this is thoroughly. Okay. So here, this is line 4. This is the verse 2 in our English translation. But he basically says, this is the idea of wash me thoroughly, and then it's from my iniquity. That word I highlighted there. It's from my iniquity. So thoroughly wash me from my iniquity. And then notice here, it's from my sin, cleanse me. So this is from my iniquity. That one Hebrew word is that expression. And then the next line begins with, from my sin, cleanse me. So in the Hebrew text, actually, as written, it is a chiasm. It's in reverse order. It is like this: wash me thoroughly from my iniquity. And then the second line is, from my sin, cleanse me. Now, the English translations, they all did it this way in order to probably, I don't know why, actually, but they decided to just translate it this way, but actually they should have followed the Hebrew word order, because it would have shown more clearly the chiasm. but the way they translated it, the translation's correct in the sense of the words. They translated all the words correctly. The idea is exactly the same. There's no error there or any problem with that. However, they did not match the word ordering, and so we miss in the translation this reversal. I don't know, Daniel, in the Mandarin text, do you have that translation with you? I'm curious how they translated it.
I don't speak Mandarin.
Oh,
You
you
would be
speak
able
Malay?
to help us out there.
Do you have that Malay
Yes.
translation?
Let me try to get a Malay translation. Hold a second, yeah.
And then Philip, can you check the Burmese translation to see if they you have one there?
Can you check it?
I'm curious if they put the word ordering is reversed in those translations.
Okay, let me check in Burmese.
Malay translation, that is verse 2.
Oh,
It's the same as the English. It'll say, wash me from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin.
Okay, so they did not reverse
the. Yeah, no, they
What
didn't reverse it.
What about verse 1, Daniel? Did they reverse it like the English translation?
Okay. It's like the English. Yes, it's like the English. It says, be gracious unto me, according to your loving kindness, according to your greatness. Yeah.
Okay.
Blot out my transgressions. Yeah, correct.
Got it.
Mm.
What about Burmese translation?
Yeah, in Burmese, verse 3 is the structure is quite similar with verse 1, like chiasm.
Oh, okay.
Chiasm.
Is that Judson's translation, or is that the Myanmar Standard Bible?
Right now, I'm checking with Jackson translation.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good. So, let me show you if you're thinking.
So long, you got the Chinese there?
Yeah, what did the Mandarin translation? How's that?
The Mandarin?
It's reverse. It's actually chiasm, but you know that the structure is merely reverse. You know that I beg you to make my sin washed, and then wash my sin.
Okay. Well, good. So they match the order. Now, if you know, again, the translation. So for the Mandarin translation, we see that in Burmese. But if you're looking at Malay or English, we don't see this reversal. So how would we know? You know, if we just read the English text here, we wouldn't know that. Well, what I like to do is after I do the translation that I have, I just identify the parallelism, and then what I'll do is I'll go to my interlinear. We've looked at this before, and I'll just check the interlinear, because the interlinear will have the Hebrew, the word order of the Hebrew text. And so I could go to verse 2 here. All right. And you can see here again can you guys see this on the screen okay? Is that big enough?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, the black font, the black words is the Hebrew text, and then the red is the interlinear definition, the dictionary definition of that word. And then of course we have the Strong's number at the top where you can get more information. But notice here in verse 2, thoroughly wash me, there's the verb, from my iniquity. Okay, as I showed you in the Hebrew text. And then notice the next line begins, and from my sin, cleanse me. See that? So the interlinears, if you look at the interlinear, go, oh, look, we have the second line begins the way the first line ends.
Mm.
Okay, so from the interlinear, you would be able to see this. So I know it's a little extra work, and maybe you're saying, who cares? Why does this matter? Why would we want to spend this extra time looking at the word order and things like that? Well, because here we see, just like in verse 1, right? Verse 1, this is David says, have mercy on me, O God, according to your loving kindness. And then, sorry, the font got weird on this. And then he started with, according to the multitude of your tender mercies, your compassion, blot out my. So in the first, again, the first line, we see this reversal. And then again, he does the same thing, a chiasm in the second line as well, as we just noticed. Why does that matter? Why do we care?
Jason,
Because
Brittany?
he's doing this on purpose. This is intentional by the writer. As David writes this poem, as he expresses this poem, he uses a chiasm. And again, remember, a chiasm is a way for the author to bring emphasis. So when he says here, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, from my sin, what's he emphasizing there? Well, because he intentionally reverses the word order, he's emphasizing my sin, my iniquity.
Mm.
He's drawing focus to that. Yes, the English translation here, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, cleanse me from my sin. That expresses the idea correctly. It's a good translation in the sense of the meaning of the words. It very accurately expresses the meaning of the words. But it loses the emphasis because it doesn't follow the actual Hebrew word order. All right, now that might seem like a subtle point and not a big deal, but actually where it's a big deal is when you preach this text, when you express, when you give instruction on this passage, you're going to want to say here, David is focusing on his sin, not just to be forgiven. Certainly he asks that, but his focus is, he says, from my iniquity, from my sin, cleanse me. So as you would explain this verse, you would draw emphasis to what David emphasizes. Again, authorial intent, right? We just want to express and focus on what the author focuses on. And here, by using a chiasm, David is drawing our attention more to his iniquity and his sin. And that helps us to understand David is taking ownership here. David is recognizing it's his fault. David sees it. He's not blaming Bathsheba. He's not blaming other things. He recognizes it's his sin, his iniquity. That's the problem here. Okay? So the chiasm helps us to David in doing this. It's not just some sort of a poetic thing to be, to show this aesthetic quality, Actually, by doing this, David is drawing our attention to what he is wanting us to see as his emphasis here. And that is, he desires to be cleansed, but the focus here is from my iniquity, from my sin. We're going to see this actually in the next line. If you go down to verse 3, I'll just do that one for you in this case. Notice he says, for I know my transgressions,
Hmm.
and my sin is ever before me. You see that? What's David done here? The reversal of that second line. Okay, so this one is also synonymous, but we see here as well a chiasm. So the focus again, my transgressions, my sin. This is communicating to us that David recognizes he is the one responsible. It's his sin, his sinful heart that has brought about this circumstance. So that's why seeing the chiasms is important. And so what I often will do is, you know, I'll do the English translation first. In my case, since I'm English speaking, I'll do the translation. Oh, it's synonymous. And then what I'll do is, okay, let me look over at the interlinear and see if there's anything. There's a reversal. So in the original Hebrew text, there is a chiasm. All right. So that's how you can find it from the Hebrew text. Even if we don't speak Hebrew, we can use this tool, this interlinear. This is BibleHub.com, interlinear. We can use this tool as a way to help us see this. Any questions on that? That makes sense? Sorry, Dwayne, you're muted. Are you asking?
Is that different from a lexicon then?
The interlinear actually is a sort of a combination of both. A lexicon is, provides the different dictionary definitions of a particular word. The interlinear will just provide what they think is the definition of that word. That's the red here. But so, for example, if we say, well, let's look at a lexicon. On this interlinear, I can go to the number above it. This is the Strong's number. Let me just press that. Okay. And here, basically, it looks like, let me expand this a little bit. The word kavas, and this gives me several helpful things. Pull that out. Here's the Brown Driver Briggs. That is a lexicon. And so notice this lexicon will have a number of definitions and some examples. To wash garments, to wash a person, only in a figurative sense. And that's pretty much just the idea of this word. And so we can see here, the NAS translation is pretty much wash or washed. That's the common translation here of the word. So here, Brown Driver Briggs, this is a lexicon. This gives the definitions of the word. In the interlinear, we only are given the interlinear just gives the definition it thinks fits the most here. We can look at it. Let's look at iniquity. Again, we'll press the Strong's number above and see what we find here. Avon or awon. And it has a basic definition: iniquity, guilt, punishment for iniquity. Then we see the different ways it's translated in the New American Standard, and it translates it as iniquity or as punishment. So we have both of those ideas. And then we have the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon, which gives one definition is iniquity, and here's several verses and examples. And then phrases of punishment, and it gives a bunch of examples. Or the guilt of iniquity. So it can refer to the sin or the guilt that the sin brings. Or the third idea is the punishment for that sin. And then there's examples. So here, the lexicon shows 3 different options, 3 possibilities for this word awon. Iniquity or sin. A second possibility is the guilt that the iniquity produces. A third possibility is the punishment from that iniquity or the consequence. All right. So then you have to study the context to determine which of those 3 options makes the most sense. All right. And so from when we go back to the interlinear, they put iniquity. So from my iniquity, wash me. All right. They thought that was the best. They could have put from the guilt of my iniquity, from the punishment of my iniquity, but they thought iniquity or sin made the most sense here in the context. So it will give, the interlinear just gives the definition that the interlinear publisher thought it is. Okay. But like I said, you do have access on the interlinear here by pressing the Strong's number. You have access then to some more information about that particular word. Okay. It's a helpful tool, I think. That answer your question, Dwayne? Or
Yeah, I think that the Bible Hub has something very similar to this, and it gives word order too.
yeah, this is Bible Hub that I'm using here. So yeah, Bible Hub has here a lot of different helpful tools. You can go directly to a lexicon if you want here by pressing there's a lexicon here, or here's the interlinear. Then it has commentaries, sermons, other stuff. But if we want to, so if we go to the lexicon, let's see what that gives us. So here's the lexicon. So it breaks down the different words in the text. So if we go to verse 2, this is verse 1. We go to verse 2. It doesn't show us the word order like the interlinear does, but it does give us each word that's used in the passage, and then gives us the Strong's number there. I like going directly to the interlinear because it's all there as well, and we get the word ordering too. So we get the word ordering from the original Hebrew, and and we get the Strong's number that we can refer to. So I use this tool quite a bit, actually. It's a good help, especially if you don't speak or remember Hebrew. It's a helpful tool since it shows us the word order and it gives us access to the word studies and such.
Yeah, a lot of times the translation doesn't throw the articles in either, and articles are really important.
Yeah, that's true. And also sometimes it will, remember we looked at this wow or vav, that the beginning of the word. Sometimes they don't catch those either, or they'll put one in when it's not there. And so, for example, we'll see that in a little bit. I think, let me see which verse it is. Verse 13. Notice it says there, then I will teach transgressors your ways. You see that there? Maybe I should, let me pull it this way. Verse 13, then I will teach transgressors your way and sinners will be converted to you. Well, if you go to verse 13, notice the word, by the way, is italicized. So remember, that tells us that's the translator saying they added that word to give a little more clarity. And if we go to the interlinear, down to verse 13. Notice there is no, there's no wow there. There's no vav at the beginning here, right? It's just the word I will teach. There's no then written here explicitly. Now notice the interlinear guy, he put in then in brackets. So he's saying, look, the idea is here, but the word isn't. And that's the same thing we just saw in the translation. They put the word then there because they believe that connects verse 13 to what came before. And I think it's a correct interpretation, but literally it should just, that word isn't there in the actual Hebrew. There's no conjunction there in the text. It just simply says, I will teach transgressors your ways. But I think it is a correct interpretation to see verse 13 as a result of verses 11 and 12, what came before. So the interlinear helps identify or show us what actual words are there or not there in the text as well. All right. Notice later in line 13, we do see that Hebrew wow or vav, and they note the conjunction and is there. That makes sense? I hope I'm not confusing anybody. So the interlinear is a really, really helpful tool to show us the actual Hebrew text, and from the guidance of the interlinear translators, we can see what's going on here. By the way, that was verse 13. I will teach transgressors your ways, and the sinful will be converted to you. It's that line. We'll get to that maybe tonight. You'll see how it goes. Okay. Any questions or comments? So yeah, this is BibleHub.com. I don't know if you can see it up there on the top of your screen. Bible Hub. Okay. So just BibleHub.com. And then you can put in the Bible reference that you want to look at. And here I just put Psalm 51 at the top. And then you can select, I just selected the interlinear here. And that's what got me to this screen. Okay. And then notice here they have all these different translations. Quite a few. They don't have the LSB yet, but they have NIV, ESV, King James, New King James, New American Standard, Amplified Version. They have the Baptist Christian Standard Bible, the Net Bible. So there's a lot of translations here. The ASV, I think the ASV is the most literal English translation. It's the best literal translation in English, but it's harder to read because it's so literal. But in any case. All right. Well, let's go back to our, and I'm going to have Shulong do the next verse. We're on verse 4 here. So notice verse 4 has 4 lines in it. So it's going to be a little more complicated. So far, verses 1, 2, and 3 each had 2 lines. They were bicola, if you remember, 2 lines, or couplets is another expression. But when we get to verse 4, David changes, and he goes from 2 lines to 4 lines in this case. So we need to consider each of these uniquely. So Shulong, you want to read the verse for us, and then why don't you take us through how you see these lines connecting?
Yep. Okay. Yep. verse 4. Against you, you only, I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified when you speak and blameless when you judge. So line 1 to 2 is developmental. My answer is developmental explains or illustrates, and line 3 and 4 is synonymous. Then line 1 to 2 plus 3 to 4 is the developmental result.
Okay. Good. Let's take a look at each of these. And what you'll notice, by the way, is I put in here, I think David here is coupling the first 2 lines and then the next 2 lines. And then I see a connection between those 2. So against you, you only, I have sinned. So I would say, notice here, I have sinned, and then he has, and I have done what is evil against you and in your sight. So it could be developmental explanation, or I think it looks like, to me, it might be synonymous as well because of the way he's constructed this. I have sinned against you, and I have done what is evil in your sight. Notice, by the way, there's an ellipsis, right? He does not put I have in the second line. But it's implied to be there. And I would say synonymous only because I have sinned and I have done what is evil. That's a synonymous idea. And then against you and in your sight, I think is also synonymous idea myself. And notice, by the way, if it is synonymous, we again have a chiasm. I have sinned, and then he reverses that and he starts the next line with that idea. I have done what is evil. Okay, so I would lean towards the synonymous in this case, though developmental explanation would not be a bad conclusion at all. But again, because David has been using synonymous so far, notice verse 1 synonymous, verse 2 synonymous, verse 3 synonymous. I think he is still doing that here at the beginning of verse 4. Now, and then because also too, notice the next 2 lines, I think Shulong is correct. You are justified. And then notice there's a ellipsis here. You are blameless. When you speak is synonymous with when you judge. Okay? You guys see that? I think Shulong's correct here. You are justified is parallel to you are blameless. And then when you speak, parallel to when you judge. So I think that's a synonymous. Now we'd say, well, okay, well, let's see. Is this chiasm or not? How would we know? Because the English translation, it doesn't reverse the words. It doesn't have, the English translation did not put when you judge, you are blameless. Okay? If it did, that would be a chiasm. So let's see. Let's look and see which one is it. How do we do that? Well, I just showed you. Let's go to the interlinear and let's look at verse. Was it 3? 4. 4, right. Okay. So let's just check this out. So against you, you only, I have sinned and evil in your sight. The implied idea of done evil in your sight. Here's the done. And evil in your sight I have done. Okay. And then he says, so that you may be found just. Sorry, when you speak down here, and blameless when you judge. Notice the word order. It matches, the English translation matches this correctly. You may be found just when you speak and blameless when you judge. All right, so it's not reversed. So I can go back and I look at my English translation and say, okay, the English translation not only is a good translation as far as the meaning of the words, but also the order of the words it matches the Hebrew text. So there's no chiasm in this case, which again is interesting, guys, because David could have made a chiasm here, right? He could have put, and when you judge, blameless, or blameless, right? That would have been a chiasm. And we'd say, oh yeah, well that makes sense because David's been doing chiasms already in the first 3 verses. So yeah, verse 4, it should be a chiasm. Well, it is a chiasm in the first line, but the second one is not. And again, remember, chiasms are intentional. So if the poet, so far David's been using them, and all of a sudden here he doesn't. Why is that? Well, I don't think he's drawing any emphasis in this second part. He's not drawing emphasis on anything here like a chiasm would do. He's just making a statement, parallel statement. Because again, remember, guys, what is he focused on so far? Verse 2, from my iniquity, and then from my sin. That was a chiasm. My transgressions, my sin. And then verse 4, I have sinned. I have done what is evil. Notice each of these chiasms is focusing on his sin, isn't it? Again, David is drawing attention to this. He's wanting us to see the emphasis here on that. But the second part of verse 4, it's not talking about his sin here. He's just describing God's justice in his judgment. And he chooses not to use a chiasm to express that. Okay? He does it this way. Questions on that?
How do you spell Kia?
Chiasm is, and it comes from the Greek letter chi, which looks like, let's see, what will be a quick way to show that.
Oh, I see you got it up there, C-H-I-A.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find a key, chi here, or key. Wow. Not used very much. Oh, there's one. There's one right here. For do that all the time. Let me take this over here. I'll just take these other letters out. So this letter here, this looks like an X, is actually a chi. And it's so chiasm came from this idea of the shape of the letter chi or chi. It looks like an X, and that's sort of what we have in a chiasm with the words. So against you only, I have sinned. And I have done what is evil in your sight. It's kind of the idea. So this sort of looks like the left part of an X here, right? You kind of see this, the shape here, because there's attention is focused here on this on these two lines. So that's why they call it a chiasm, just because it looks like the letter key as far as it's how it's developed. Same thing here. We could go up to this line. For I know my transgressions and my sin ever before me. So again, this line, the first line parallels the last line, and then the second line parallels the third line. And so this sort of looks again like the left part of the key or chi. I don't know if that makes things more confusing or not, but that's sort of where it came from. So yeah, chiasm is back to Dwayne's question. That's how you spell it. Okay. All right. Now, any questions or anything at this point? Hopefully this is making sense. Looks like we lost Pastor Philip. Wonder if his power went out. Now what we can do then is, okay, so we have identified the couplets here. There's two couplets in verse 4. And we've noticed that both are synonymous. Lines 1 and 2 are synonymous. Lines 3 and 4 are synonymous. And then I like to consider now, is there any sort of connection between these 4 lines? And I think there is. Notice the translation puts "so that" here. It's showing a link, because there is a, let's go to the interlinear. Notice this word here, lema'an. It's the idea of so that. It's a conclusion. I have sinned and done evil in your sight, so that, here's that word, it's a conclusion, it's a result. All right. You may be found just when you speak and blameless when you judge. And so here, this "so that" is correctly identified by the translation. And I think it tells us the relationship between lines 3 and 4 with lines 1 and 2. And I think Shulong correctly identified this. It's a good job that he noticed that, the developmental result. It's a result of lines 1 and 2. Lines 3 and 4 are a result of lines 1 and 2. All right, so what we're doing here is we're just trying to notice any relationship between the lines within a verse. Later on, when we do a diagram of this psalm, we would look at the relationship between verses. But here we're just looking at the relationship of the lines within the verse. All right, questions on that? Or comments, thoughts? Okay, and again, it's important to notice there's a pattern so far, right? We see verses 1, 2, and 3 are couplets, synonymous chiasms. Verse 4 has 4 lines. So now he's deviated. And the first 2 lines are a chiasm, the second 2 are not. But the second 2 are related. They're also synonymous, and they're related to the first 2 through the result. Now notice when we get to verse 5, he's back to 2 lines. See that? Line 1, line 2. And by the way, we'll notice he's back to his pattern from the first few verses. Let's see, Pastor Philip, let me give verse 5 to you. Can you go ahead and read it and then let us know what kind of parallelism you see?
Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in my sin, my, how should I read?
Can you see that? My mother conceived me. See
My
that?
mother saved me.
Yes.
So this is parallelism, and also parallelism in chiasm,
Okay.
because
What kind of
I,
parallelism? Is it synonymous, contrastive, developmental?
synonymous,
Yes.
synonymous parallelism
Yes.
as well. It
Yeah.
is in chiasm, right? Because I was brought forth, and my mother conceived me, iniquity, and in chiasm in the between, in iniquity, and in my sin.
All right, good. So we can see it's synonymous. I was brought forth. My mother conceived me. That's the same idea expressed in a different way. In iniquity and in sin, same idea, just synonyms. And notice here, yeah, the order's reversed in the second line. All right, very good. Okay. Questions on that? Hopefully that one makes sense. All right, then let's go to verse 6. Daniel, I'm going to ask you to do this one.
Okay. Behold, you desire truth in the innermost being, and in the hidden part, you will make me know wisdom. Again, there is a synonymous, and I think there's a chiasm there, where in the innermost part, and in the hidden part. So the first part is you desire truth in the innermost being, and then in the hidden part, you want me to know wisdom. But so I will come to know both truth and wisdom.
Yes.
And that idea is synonymous.
Yeah, you desire truth. You make me know wisdom. Truth and wisdom, you as a subject. So that I think is a similar idea. And then, yeah, in the innermost being, in the hidden part, those are synonymous. The same thing. And yes, Daniel observed it. Notice the reversal of the second line compared to the first. Again, drawing attention to the inner, the soul, the inner person, the inner you.
Yes.
Okay. So we see here a pattern, don't we? Synonymous chiasm. Very common so far in the psalm. This is a unique psalm, by the way. That's one of the reasons I chose it. Not only is it a powerful expression of repentance, but also to the way he does this is he uses his chiasms and the synonymous chiasms quite extensively. It's unique in that sense. I don't think there's another psalm that uses it so much as David does here. And we'll talk about why that is when we finish. Questions? Okay. Dwayne, let's come back to you. Verse 7. See what you think.
Okay, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Well, purge me and wash me, I shall be clean, I shall be whiter. That's synonymous again, it's just repeating here.
Yep. So purify me with hyssop. I shall be clean. Wash me. I shall be whiter than snow. That's clearly synonymous. And now that we're seeing a pattern with David, we have to ask the question, is it a chiasm? Because the English translation does not show that. Okay, it just shows the same word ordering. So what we want to do then is, okay, let's go check out our interlinear here. and go to, is it verse 7? Yeah, verse 7. Let's see. Okay. Purge me with hyssop, I shall be clean. That's the same as the English. Wash me,
Wash me.
and snow, I shall be whiter than. Okay. So no, the word order matches the English matches the word order correctly. So in this case, the English translation that we have is correct, not only in the word definitions that it identifies correctly, but also in the order of the words. So there's no chiasm here in this case. All right. Which is interesting. We say, well, he's been using it so much already. He chooses not to here in verse 7, but it is synonymous. Okay. All right. Let me ask Shulong to do the next one here. Verse 8.
Okay, verse 8. Make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. Okay, it is synonymous.
Okay, so we have you would have joy and gladness and rejoice.
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yep.
Make me to hear.
And let the bones which you have broken.
Okay. This one has a similar idea. As well. I had actually, this one was a little tougher for me. So I see the synonymous possibility. I also see possibly a developmental as the second line sort of illustrating the first, being an illustration of. But this one was a little tougher. So I could see synonymous as a reasonable option there, because he's been doing synonymous so much already. But because if he had said, something like, make the bones which you have broken rejoice, I would see more of the synonymous idea. And maybe that is the case, let the bones, he could be expressing this in a prayer, may the bones. And I you know what? Maybe so. Yeah, that would be more of a synonymous idea. How is in the Mandarin translation, Shulong? Does it look more synonymous there?
Yes. No, it's actually result.
Oh, yeah, I think if we look at the interlinear, it also expresses it that way. Make me hear joy and gladness. And then that, notice they put that in brackets here, that the bones you may have broke. So they see more of a result. So that too could be, yeah, this one's a little tougher. And sometimes that's going to be the case. It won't necessarily be clear as to which one it is. Let me look at the other English translations, see if any of them add like a, let's see. We're on verse 7 or verse 8. Make me. Yeah, see, notice they have, make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have crushed rejoice. And then notice they put a footnote here. I don't know if you can read it. May you make. So they see the idea here of this being a prayer. And if that's the case, then it would be more more synonymous. May you make
Mm.
me to hear joy. Let, or may the bones which you have crushed rejoice.
Mm.
Let's see what the ESV does. They just have let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones. So they have also a parallel idea. Synonymous, sorry. See that?
Mm.
Let me hear. Let the bones. Look at the New King James.
Mm.
Make me hear joy and gladness. That, okay, they put the,
Mm.
so, so notice, so the New King James would be developmental result, right? See that? Make me hear joy and gladness, that, or so that the bones you may broken rejoice. The ESV would be synonymous. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. The LSB would also be synonymous with the footnote there. May you make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. What about the NIV? The New International Version has let me hear joy and glad. Let the bones. So they also would be synonymous.
Mhm. In Malay, it's developmental result.
Okay. So that
It
follows
says,
more.
yeah, I mean, hearing of joy and gladness unto me, so that my bones which are broken can rejoice.
Okay. So this one, even the translations are, a little bit, they're challenged by what to do with that. And again, this is like when we diagram, there is some interpretive aspects here. So, we may have to just say, well, for me, it seems like it might be synonymous because maybe it's a prayer. Like, yeah, may you make me to hear joy, or let me hear joy and gladness. May the bones which you have broken rejoice. Okay, you guys, to make sense, at least what the options are here. So you go, well, okay, does going to the interlinear help us at all? Let's see, maybe verse 8. Make me hear. Maybe, yeah. Now, if you understand Hebrew grammar a little more, I think the idea is that this idea is a more of a prayer because of the construction of this verb. But because it's an imperfect verb, the way it's written here, maybe the idea of more in the idea of a prayer, or it's called the jussive case, but that's more complicated. We wouldn't see that from the interlinear. So the interlinear doesn't really help us either. So this would be an interpretive issue that you'd have to look at in more detail, either with commentaries or things, get some other help with this. Unless you know Hebrew. But I think the Hebrew does express the idea of this idea of may you make me. So more of a prayerful consideration. Any case. So verse 8's a little more of a challenge for us. Let's get to verse 9 here. Pastor Philip, you want to give verse 9 a try?
Sure.
Let me position it a little better here for you. Okay.
Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. So, Pastor, I think this is a parallelism, synonymous parallelism. because hide your face from my sins and all my iniquities. Those are similar.
Yes.
Hide and out. Yes.
Yes. Good. I think I agree. Hide your face from my sins, blot out all my iniquities. So again, we have my sins, my iniquities. Those are synonymous. And then hide your face and blot out. So those are the words. They're a little different, but again, with recognizing that this is synonymous, notice he's expressing how blotting out or erasing his sins is a similar idea to hiding his face from them. So we get some insight there. Now, question is, okay, now is this a chiasm? Because in the English translation, it's not.
No, yeah.
So let's take a look at the interlinear just to see. And here he's got, okay, hide your face from my sins and all my iniquities blot out. Ah, what do we see here? From my sins ends the first line. All my iniquities begins the second line. Hide is the verb at the beginning of the first line. Blot out is the verb at the end of the second line. So what has he done here?
This is chiasm.
Yes. So we can see by looking at the Hebrew text, we see the word order should be like this. Hide your face from my sins and all my iniquities blot out. Okay.
And the writer puts emphasis. He has an emphasis, right?
Yeah. So where's the focus here? Again,
My
right?
sins and iniquities. Yes.
Yeah. And he's done this before. So again, from this pattern, I think we're getting a little bit of, again, focus here. He's really focused on his sin, isn't he?
Yes.
There's a real, so we could put this, if we wanted to, you know, correctly, or not correctly, but follow sort of the, show this a little more visually, right? And again, the attention is drawn on the center of the chiasm here, particularly my sins, my iniquities. Okay, that's exactly right what we saw in iniquity here, verse 5, and in sin, verse 4, I have sinned, done what is evil. Verse 3, my transgressions, my sin. Verse 2,
my iniquity.
There was a chiasm in verse 2, if I remember correctly, from the Hebrew text.
Yes.
Or was there not? Yeah, there was, right?
In Hebrew, it is
in the Hebrew.
Chiasm. Yes.
Okay, and again, notice. So we're seeing a pattern here, aren't we?
Yes.
And I think, again, there's, by noticing this, guys, this helps us, this guides us into correctly understanding what David is saying. Because again, he's drawing emphasis to his sin, his iniquity. All right. So not only the emotion is there, that emphasis, you know, my sin, my iniquity, my transgressions, but also we see a principle here of genuine repentance, don't we? If this prayer is really an expression of a repentant heart, one principle we can see from this is a truly repentant person takes ownership or recognizes it is their sin that is the problem. That we learn from David here in this psalm that we are to take responsibility for our sin, not blame someone else, not point the finger outside of us, but to recognize our sin is the problem. My sin, my iniquity. And so the chiasms here are not just, so we can be, these Hebrew poet scholars, and it's not academic. That's what I'm trying to say here. It draws us to not only what the author's emphasizing, but even draws us to a principle of repentance. That this is what true repentance looks like. A person who is accepting responsibility for their sin, who is recognizing that their sin is the problem. It wasn't Bathsheba, it wasn't Nathan, it wasn't God even. David didn't blame anyone else but himself here. And so we see that being emphasized by David by doing this. So this is why I'm showing this to you, not just, so we can, be expert Old Testament scholars in Hebrew poetry. That's not the point. What we're trying to do is get to what is the original author showing us? What is he telling us? What does he want us to understand? And where's the emotion and emphasis here? Because again, it's poetry. So poetry, part of it is the emotion that's brought in. And David is really, you can see him almost, wringing his hands or clenching his fists, that my sin, my iniquity. There is great conviction by these chiasms because they're intentionally done by the author to express the emphasis. And so you would not be imposing your own thoughts on the text by giving emotion here, because David is showing us here his emotion. He's showing us here what he's emphasizing. He's showing us what is on his mind and heart. The main thing on his mind and heart is that he did this. It's his sin. It's his iniquity. He's responsible. So that's something you definitely will need to draw out as you teach this passage. When I teach Psalm 51, I teach it as the principles or the qualities of genuine repentance. What does genuine repentance look like? And so I just draw out from the psalm some characteristics of that. And one big one is a genuinely repentant person takes responsibility for his or her sin. Does not shift the blame to someone else. And one of the reasons I see that is not only from his repetition of iniquity and sin and transgression, but also these chiasms. Okay? Any questions or thoughts about that? We're going to have to end here. Guess we've run out of time, but I think this psalm helps us see the power or the effectiveness of parallelism, of examining the parallelism, because it can help draw out things that the author's wanting to show us, emphasize. And as I said, so far what we've seen is mostly synonymous. So whenever David deviates or changes from synonymous to developmental or something else, we should take note of that, because he's been mainly synonymous most of the way through. When he changes, I say, he's doing something different here. That may be intentional, and we would want to consider that as well. So whenever you see patterns and then they change from the pattern, that should draw our attention. Maybe the author's trying to show us something here. Okay. Same thing with the number of lines, you know, verse 1, verse 2, 3, verse 5, 6, 7, 8 are all 2 lines, but verse 4 is 4 lines. Again, a change from the pattern. So something to consider as you're working through and interpreting the psalm. Now, parallelism isn't the final step in our interpretation at all. We have many more steps to do, but parallelism does help us draw out some insights as we are trying to understand what the author's saying. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions or comments, we'll just pick it up in verse 10, I guess. Next time we meet next week. I will be in the Philippines. I'm leaving in a couple days for the Philippines, but we should be able to still meet together. Hopefully the Wi-Fi is good, but let's plan on meeting at the same time next week. And we'll keep going through Psalm 51, Lord willing. Okay. All right. Let me ask Brother Daniel to close our time in prayer.
Yeah.